On his initial day as CEO, he summoned me into his office. Sitting in my father-in-law's chair, a seat that Walter Holt had occupied for 23 years, he reclined as if he deserved it, as though the chair was rightfully his. His tie was slightly askew, and his new leather shoes still made a creaking sound whenever he crossed his legs. There was an air of arrogance about him, an arrogance born of inherited position. This kind of arrogance differs from that of someone who has climbed to the top through hard work. The self-made person is often boastful about their achievements, reminding others of the days when they were doubted. However, a person who inherits their position tends to be proud of their authority, for deep down, they fear it's the only thing that sets them apart from the ordinary. His suspicion breeds an unkindness within him, which he perceives as power. Preston Holt was 31 years old, having left every job after no more than 14 months and spending most of the previous decade being subtly ousted from positions arranged by his father. Clarify that he wasn't dim-witted. This narrative isn't about an unintelligent man committing a foolish error. Preston was intelligent, charismatic, and capable in social situations, yet he tragically lacked perspective. This perspective is gained through constructing something from nothing, experiencing failure on one's own terms, and choosing honesty even when the other party has no incentive to be lenient. That morning, an unspoken chasm, unperceived by Preston but significant, was poised to shape everything subsequent. Now he regarded me as if I were debris on his shoe. "Garrison," he began, foregoing my surname, "we need to discuss your role here." I took a seat opposite him, remaining silent. Over the years, I discovered that silence could be an influential weapon in a room where someone was on the verge of making a grave error. "Apparently, you've been here for some time," Preston continued, neatening a pen on his desk that didn't need adjustment. "My wife mentioned that your father harbors a soft spot for you, that he feels remorseful about something from the past, which is why you're still employed." He acknowledged it. I gave a slow nod in acknowledgement. "She isn't incorrect," I replied, "that your father and I share a history." Preston offered a smile in response. The man's smile suggested he believed he commanded a room beyond his comprehension. "With Dad gone for 3 weeks and me in charge," he declared, "I don't do charity." He pushed a manila folder toward the desk. "Here's your termination package, effective immediately. It includes 2 weeks severance, which is quite generous given your contributions." I glanced at the folder, choosing not to open it. "Preston," I said calmly, "consider long and hard about what you're doing right now." His expression altered subtly. I don't believe anyone had addressed him in such a composed manner for quite some time. He was accustomed to people either yielding or erupting. My composure unnerved him, and unsettled individuals often act imprudently. He rose from his chair. "I believe you should depart," he suggested, allowing me a brief moment to. The following events are the ones that remain etched in my memory. Not due to surprise, but because they revealed Preston Holt's true character with alarming precision. He circled the desk, snatched a file, and shoved it forcefully against my torso. Then, in the presence of 2 junior managers who had entered the open office, he commanded me to leave or he would arrange for my departure via security. He added the final blow. "For years, you've been taking advantage of your father's guilt. That stops now. You mean nothing here. You never did." I retrieved the file, fastened my jacket, and looked at him one last time before departing. "This will be something you'll regret," I stated. "Not as a threat, but as an observation," he chuckled. 3 days after Walter Holt's arrival at Phoenix Sky Harbor, I received a call. It wasn't from Walter, it was from Preston, and he no longer laughed. Prior to recounting the incident involving Walter's arrival home, allow me to introduce myself. Garrison Cole, aged 46, residing in Phoenix, Arizona, specifically Arcadia, an area adorned with bougainvillea and backdropped by violet-tinged mountains at sunset. I've called this place home for a decade, since my migration from Chicago carrying only a duffel bag and papers of business incorporation. I tend to keep my financial affairs private. If you have ever felt unappreciated by someone who failed to recognize your value, then this narrative is intended for you. It's about authentic individuals, critical decisions, and justice that appears logical only in hindsight. The events I will share unfolded after I was underestimated, much like Preston did, and his mother chose not to acknowledge the significance of my identity. However, it played a crucial role in shaping what transpired subsequently. In my late 30s, I established a personal principle after witnessing numerous men conflate their net worth with self-worth, leading to many relationship breakdowns due to financial arrogance. Simplicity is my lifestyle. I own a 6-year-old pickup truck, sport a rotation of dark shirts and clean jeans, drink my coffee without additives, and usually retire by 10 p.m. However, beneath this modest exterior, I am the joint creator and substantial stockholder of Holt Coal Industrial Solutions, which is now run without me following Preston Holt's dismissal. Here's how that business came to be. In 2009, Walter Holt was 52 and struggling financially. He had spent 2 decades constructing a mid-sized industrial supply company. Honest labor, dependable contracts with construction companies and manufacturing plants throughout Arizona and New Mexico. But the financial crisis had squeezed his profits. At age 31, I had a major financial crisis looming. One of my key business partners defaulted on a $1.8 million contract, and my bank was restructuring my line of credit in a way that would halt my cash flow within the next 18 months. In my 20s, I worked in private equity, focusing on distressed industrial businesses in Chicago. With this background, I could easily discern that Walter's company wasn't about to fail. Instead, it was struggling due to a lack of oxygen. Over dinner at Durant's on North Central Avenue, an old steakhouse with red leather booths and artwork adorning the walls, we talked for 4 hours. Walter was a straightforward individual who didn't shy away from revealing his mistakes or hiding the truth. He openly shared his financial records, admitted his errors without hesitation, and never attempted to sugarcoat the situation. I found this admirable. Over the course of my career in finance, I've faced numerous men in distress, and the majority spent the initial 90 minutes attempting to convince me they weren't truly in crisis. Walter, however, simply stated, "I've made some poor decisions. I need a partner who can address what I can't perceive." Upon my return to Chicago, I scrutinized everything he had provided, recalculated the figures 3 times, and reached out to him 2 weeks later. "I will join as a co-founder," I informed him. "In exchange for a significant stake of 55%, I'll provide capital injection and restructuring control for a period of 24 months. After that, you'll manage operations. I'll remain absent from day-to-day affairs. We'll share strategic decisions, and we'll both exit this venture wealthier than when we entered." Walter fell silent for a moment. "Why would you claim 55% of a struggling company?" he inquired. "Because I've perused your contracts," I replied. "You have 3 long-term agreements with municipal construction programs that are resistant to recession. The cost to duplicate your warehouse system is $8 million, and you have an unrivaled reputation in this area. You're not facing financial troubles. Instead, you've exhausted your available resources." Walter made one stipulation before our call ended. He wanted his contribution to the company kept confidential within the organization. He emphasized that for 20 years, the culture has been built on employees working towards a cause they comprehend and support. If they discover a private equity investor from Chicago owns the majority of the business, it could jeopardize this mindset. Walter wants them to work for the company, not a shareholder. There's a distinction. This was one of the most astute observations I've heard from a business owner in years, underscoring why Walter's enterprise is valuable despite its challenges. I agreed and relocated to Phoenix. For 2 years, I reorganized debt, revised credit terms, secured 2 federal supply contracts via connections in Chicago, and supervised covert operational adjustments that transformed the company from operating at a loss to profitability. By 2013, Holt Coal became profitable. By 2016, it flourished. Last year, it neared $60 million in annual revenue, expanding into Nevada and Utah. Walter and I maintained our partnership behind the scenes. He oversaw the floor, managed staff, cultivated relationships. I handled strategy, financing, and decisions left out of meeting minutes. This was the setup we both favored. The majority of employees perceived me as a long-standing senior advisor. Some viewed me as a permanent consultant. The junior staff, those who joined recently, scarcely recognized my name. From what it seems, Preston had been informed by his mother that I was a person whom his father kept due to misguided loyalty. It is unclear what Diane Holt thought about me, as I never inquired. Walter's wife was a multifaceted individual who was socially adept, overly protective of her children, and inherently incapable of acknowledging that Preston, her son, wasn't inherently talented but merely required polishing. She attributed his failures marketing job, sales leadership, failed startup funded by his father's money, business partnership, and a restaurant ending in litigation, to various factors like undervaluing, dysfunctional teams, being ahead of its time and jealousy. However, she never contemplated the straightforward reason. I could comprehend Diane's reasoning, despite not concurring with her judgments. For 2 decades, she witnessed her spouse investing everything into a company. She endured hardships, terror-filled times, and years of apprehension, with their Paradise Valley home's mortgage being her constant worry before bedtime. She made several compromises, be they social or personal, to support a man whose mind was always preoccupied with his business. When the company eventually flourished, a piece of her believed that prosperity was for the family, that they were destined for success. That their son, Preston, was just waiting to find the perfect vessel for his talents. She wasn't the antagonist in this tale. I want to emphasize that clearly. She was a mother whose love for her son was so intense it solidified into something harmful over time. It's one of the saddest patterns in human behavior, the protection turning into confinement. Walter felt a unique pain for his son, understanding what others observed but unable to express it verbally. He had attempted to offer Preston chances within the company, taking care to limit potential harm. Preston managed for 8 months in logistics coordination before a vendor issue required a shift, spent 6 months in sales support until a client relationship deteriorated, and only stayed 4 months in operations prior to Walter transferring him back. The agreement they reached, lasting 3 years, was that Preston served as a special projects consultant with a high salary, company vehicle, and an ambiguous job description to keep him engaged without granting him control over significant matters. However, this arrangement continued until Walter planned a 3-week anniversary trip with Diane to Costa Rica, at which point it was disrupted. It's unclear who suggested that Preston act as interim CEO while Walter was away. I believe it might have been Diane. I suspect Walter consented because discussing otherwise would have necessitated a conversation he had avoided for 30 years, and no one considered asking me, as they don't fully grasp my role. I discovered this on a Monday morning when I reached the office at East Camelback Road to find that Preston had convened an all-staff meeting on the previous Friday afternoon and declared his temporary promotion. Since I was in Albuquerque finalizing details for a new contract with a state infrastructure project, I missed the gathering. My assistant, a bright young woman named Bree, updated me upon my arrival. "What was the atmosphere like?" I asked. Bree selected her words wisely. "Cautious," she responded. "People were courteous, but there was an unusual amount of eye contact." I nodded in understanding. "Did he mention any particular changes in operations?" "He mentioned he would spend his first week evaluating senior staff performance." I pondered this information briefly. I responded with a simple "okay," adding that I would inform him when he needed to meet. The meeting invitation arrived at 11:14 the same morning as I had previously explained. Later on, after leaving the office and walking out of the building, I returned home, prepared coffee, and observed a roadrunner traversing my yard. It was the actual bird native to the Sonoran Desert, swift, peculiar, and oblivious to its surroundings. I contemplated this bird for some time before contacting my attorney, Douglas Faber, who has been my corporate counsel for 14 years. He's a lawyer who always speaks clearly and calmly, so when he gets loud, you listen carefully. "Recount every detail," Douglas instructed. "I did every single thing, the file, Preston's statements, the public altercation." There was a moment of silence. "Garrison," Douglas clarified. "I want to make something crystal clear. Preston Holt doesn't have the power to fire you or change any aspect of your dealings with the company, such as your role, pay, or relationship. The shareholder agreement leaves no room for ambiguity. Any significant alterations to personnel at director level or higher necessitate approval from the majority shareholders. And that is you." He fell silent again. "Remember that," I said. "So what's the plan?" I glanced at the roadrunner standing on my patio, watching me with one bead-like eye. "No action yet," I replied. "Walter arrives in 3 days." "We should wait," Douglas realized. "You intend for Preston to have 3 unanticipated days to persuade himself he has escaped consequences. There's a distinction here. The following days were surprisingly tranquil compared to what might be expected. I'd like to address a point directly since I comprehend some of your thoughts. You're questioning why we didn't immediately return, why we didn't contact Walter in Costa Rica and inform him, or file an injunction the same day, storm back into the building, and unequivocally make Preston understand his actions and their target. I've pondered this extensively, and here's my rationale. Because at 46 years old, I've witnessed enough situations to know that when someone makes a significant error, reaching beyond their authority for something not rightfully theirs, the most effective retaliation is rarely the most vociferous one. The most boisterous reaction provides them a tale to mask themselves with. It enables them to portray themselves as the victim in their own retelling. It generates clamor that overshadows the truth. The truth, in this instance, was straightforward. Preston dismissed the dominant shareholder of the company he believed he led. This fact didn't necessitate reinforcement. It required silence and quietude. It needed 3 days for Preston to think he had cleared the house, made his imprint, and showcased his decisive leadership. He needed time to feel at ease before the terrain changed. I didn't return to the office. Instead, I worked from home, managed my correspondence, spoke twice with the Nevada expansion team, and dined with my wife Nadine on the patio both nights. Nadine is a landscape architect with her own firm in Tempe. We have been married for 7 years. She hails from Flagstaff, studied at ASU, and possesses a quality I've always respected. She recognizes the distinction between an urgent issue to address and one that requires time before intervention. Upon learning about Preston's actions, she remained silent for a while, asking, "Was he aware?" To which I replied, "No." Her next question was, "Does his mother realize your true position in the company?" I responded, "I believe not." Walter had chosen discretion as per our agreement. Nadine gave a slow nod, her wine glass twirling in her hand. The night air of Phoenix was warm, subtly carrying the scent of orange blossoms from the neighboring trees. "He'll panic once he learns the truth," she predicted. "Yes, will you make things easier for him?" I pondered about Preston's forceful gesture with the folder against my chest and the presence of the 2 junior managers. His words, "You're insignificant here, you always were," echoed in my mind. "No," I confirmed, "I'm not." Nadine looked at me for a long moment before reaching out to touch my hand. "Good," she affirmed. 2:18 p.m. on a Thursday, Walter Holt's flight touched down at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. I was informed by Douglas when he notified Walter's assistant that transportation had been arranged. Walter phoned me at 4:47 while I was in my home office scrutinizing the Nevada contract papers. My phone displayed his name then. "Walter Garrison," I replied. His voice was altered, notably flat, a tone I recognized signifying a man managing something massive and scorching within him. "I need you to share what transpired. What do you already know?" "I'm aware that Preston convened a staff meeting and declared himself CEO. I know he conducted performance reviews for 3 days. I know he dismissed 4 employees, among them yourself." A brief pause followed. "Yes, it's correct." Silence ensued. "Garrison," Walter said, his voice slightly breaking at the utterance of my name. "I don't know how to express myself at the moment," you stated. "You don't need to explain, you need to speak with your son instead," I replied. "We talked 20 minutes ago." After a brief silence, "He was clueless," Walter resumed. "He truly didn't know." I remained quiet, allowing him to continue. "He believed Diane was correct," Walter added. "He thought you were here due to my sympathy for you. He claimed he was restructuring the company, making it more efficient." Walter's voice softened. "He wasn't aware. I never told him. That's on me." "Walter, I need you and your son at the office tomorrow morning," I instructed. "I intend to handle this appropriately." The conference room on the 4th floor of the Camelback Road building offered a panoramic view of Camelback Mountain. On a bright Phoenix morning, it glowed with an amber hue that seemed intentionally crafted, as if illuminated from within. I had occupied this room countless times before, and it was where Walter and I had made critical decisions over the past 15 years. 8 o'clock found me present. Bree served coffee unsolicited. Preston joined at 1:15, appearing exhausted after a sleepless dozen hours. His jacket donned, collar unfastened. Upon noticing me, he paused. A single nod from me, and he seated himself far off, avoiding eye contact. Walter entered 3 minutes later, depositing a folder on the table reminiscent of one Preston handed me 4 days ago, then took his position between us at the head. At 67, Walter bore the mark of one who's weathered adversity and understands its price. His mane had turned completely white in recent times. Hands once used in warehouses, still telling tales. "I'm here to clarify something," Walter stated, his gaze fixed on the folder rather than either of us. "Listen without interruption as I speak." He unfolded the folder, noticing his hands remained steady. Such steadiness was characteristic of Walter, a trait admired from their initial encounter at Durance, where he presented his financial woes without a trace of tremor in voice or hand. Many men crumble under the burden of their achievements and expenses. Walter bore this weight differently, slowing down and becoming more measured, much like ballast steadies a ship. Garrison Cole, the co-founder and significant shareholder of Holt Cole Industrial Solutions, holds 55% of the company's shares. He has held this position since 2009, when he supplied the necessary capital and restructuring knowledge to prevent the company from imploding. Walter passed a document to Preston. This is the original shareholder agreement. I suggest you read the first page. Preston hesitantly grasped the document. After reading it, he placed it back down without meeting my gaze. The 4 dismissed staff members will be rehired today with full compensation and a written apology from the company, Walter elaborated. The negotiations with suppliers concerning revised terms are to be called off, and they will be informed of this. The modifications you announced in the Tuesday company-wide email are being reversed. Walter closed the file. Additionally, Garrison's position, compensation, and authority have been fully reinstated as of now, meaning his suspension never actually occurred because you lacked the necessary authority to do so. Preston stared at the table. Preston, Walter addressed him. His son looked up. I owe you a conversation that should have taken place years ago, Walter said, and I must apologize to Garrison for creating an environment where such events transpired. Turning to me, he added, I'm sorry, Garrison. The arrangement we settled on, maintaining confidentiality about your position, seemed reasonable initially. I ought to have reassessed it prior to my departure. I understood. Walter shifted his attention back to Preston. What transpired, the physical interaction, public embarrassment, the harsh language transcends a business error. That's a personal issue between you and Garrison. I can't remedy that. Only you can. The room fell silent. Camelback Mountain remained in the window behind Walter, golden and motionless. Preston eventually met my gaze. At 31 years old, he appeared different from the person I had known peripherally as someone who barely touched your life. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed his age. 31, not a CEO, not a troubleshooter. Merely a young man who had committed an act he couldn't undo and was just starting to grasp the true price he paid. I wasn't aware, he whispered. I replied, you weren't, he paused. That doesn't excuse it. My words, my actions, I acknowledged. It doesn't change a thing. I'm sorry, Preston admitted, and I want to clarify this because it matters. He spoke sincerely, not like someone apologizing to avoid punishment, the way people apologize when they've truly realized the gravity of their actions. I recalled Nadine's question on the patio. Are you going to let him off easy? Preston, I said. I've been part of this company for 15 years. Your father and I built something substantial together. I don't want to see it destroyed, neither do I wish to see you harmed. However, there's something you need to comprehend. What occurred in that office, the folder, the physical contact, the remarks made before those 2 managers, that wasn't a mere lapse in judgment. That was a conscious decision, and decisions carry consequences. He nodded in understanding. I'm ready to move on, I stated. Moving forward necessitates honesty. You need to comprehend the essence of this company and your position within it, as well as your true potential to contribute to it, not the perception others may have of your abilities. Walter watched me intently, a familiar expression on his face, that of a man who had yearned for someone to acknowledge him for a prolonged period, finally hearing those words spoken. I went on, I'd like to propose an opportunity to you, not out of benevolence, but based on the same reasoning I used with your father in 2009. There is a role within this company that suits your strengths. The Nevada expansion requires a local relationship manager. Someone capable of establishing relationships at the grassroots level, building trust among vendors, and managing the human element of market entry. This is genuine work, tailored to your abilities. I met his gaze squarely. With people, Preston, you shine particularly when not striving for approval. I've observed this enough to be certain. He appeared surprised by this statement. However, it would involve starting anew, I said. No exaggerated titles or labels, a genuine role with genuine responsibility and repercussions if performance falls short. Why would you propose such an opportunity? He inquired sincerely, not tactically. Because your father constructed something valuable to protect, I replied. Also, I've never subscribed to the belief that people cannot change. I've encountered too many men who initially appeared unsuccessful but were simply misguided. I leaned back. I might be mistaken about you, but I prefer honest errors over presumptions. The initial phone call mentioned at the beginning of this narrative, the one from Preston 3 days after Walter arrived, came in at 6:43 a.m. I was already awake. I was outside on the patio with my coffee as the desert sky transitioned from gray to pale gold to a thin, sharp blue. His name popped up on my screen and I let it ring twice before responding. It was Garrison. His voice sounded rough, strained from a lack of sleep and tears, though I didn't mention that. He was my dad, he had told me, a brief silence. He informed me of everything, the shareholder agreement, his actions in 2009, the true nature of the company. Okay, I replied. I hit you, he said. In public, I confirmed. He fell silent. I said things that can't be undone. After a lengthy pause, he spoke again. I'm calling not because of your position in the company, but because of what I did to you as an individual, and those are two separate matters. I gazed at the fading golden sky above Camelback. Indeed, they are different matters, I agreed. And yes, that distinction is important. I don't know how to rectify this situation. It can't be fixed, I responded. This situation doesn't allow for the change you seek. However, you can alter your approach from here. Pause, my mother, he hesitated, then fell silent. Your mother cares for you, I stated. It's genuine. What she said about me was incorrect, Preston. It was merely a misunderstanding. People often construct narratives around things they fail to comprehend, and she failed to grasp my nature, which isn't entirely her fault. She should have inquired. Yes, she should have, I agreed. You should have as well. A heavy silence filled the phone line, a silence that occurs when two individuals cease pretending and speak sincerely. I wish to accept the Nevada position, Preston eventually voiced. If it's still open, if you truly feel that way, I want to prove myself worthy of it. I understand now what I didn't before. What do you mean? I inquired. A moment of pause. Ownership doesn't equate just because something is within your family lineage, he stated. My father constructed something, you constructed something, I haven't created anything, and feigning I had feigning I was entitled to something due to my father, that was he fell silent. That was the issue, that has always been the issue. I pondered over it. Preston, I said. Report to our Phoenix base on Monday morning, not Camelback office. I'll provide you the address of the Nevada team's temporary Phoenix location. Arrive at 8 o'clock sharp. Dress as if you are going to a construction site, not a meeting, and discard your father's identity there. Understood. You won't be recognized as Walter Holt's son, I said. You'll be known as Preston, the new regional liaison. That is all until you create something more for yourself. I comprehend. One final point, I added. The two managers who witnessed your actions against me. A pause ensued. Yes, he whispered. You'll find an opportunity to respond to that situation informally, as a fellow human would. You'll recognize it when it comes. He was quiet again, then he responded. I will. I trusted him. Before concluding our conversation, there's one more detail from this tale I need to share with you, as it was Diane Holt who played a significant role and might have influenced me the most. 3 weeks following the resolution, after the reinstatement of the 4 employees, after making calls to vendors, and once Preston had been in Nevada for 2 weeks, apparently fulfilling his duties according to the team there, Walter invited Nadine and I for dinner, saying it was a family gathering. Diane wants to apologize, he added. After discussing this with Nadine, who listens without hastily offering opinions, she asked, Do you wish to attend? Not knowing what I desired, I admitted honestly that I felt uncertain but thought I should go. We went on a Saturday evening. The Holts resided in Paradise Valley, in a house perched atop a hill overlooking the city, a house where one could sit on the terrace and behold Phoenix sprawled out below like an illuminated circuit board at night. Walter prepared steaks. Nadine and Diane sipped white wine, while Walter and I, being men, stood near the grill, partially focused on the meat, yet engaging in a separate conversation. Prior to dinner, Diane approached me. At 64, she exuded an air of elegance characteristic of women who have always been aware of being observed. She bore a resemblance to Preston, sharing his dark brown eyes and the same underlying intelligence. She ventured out onto the edge of the terrace and stood beside me, gazing at the city below. I owe you an apology, she said. Diane, no, let me express it. She turned to face me squarely. I told Preston a tale about you that was fabricated for convenience's sake. You were a puzzle I couldn't grasp, so I reduced your complexity to fit my comprehension. This is a pattern I've followed throughout my life, making people seem smaller to accommodate the stories I desired. I didn't speak. I did the same to Preston, she admitted. I exaggerated his stature for the sake of maintaining a narrative. She gazed at the city. He contacted me from Nevada last week. His voice was weary but authentic. He informed me he was learning the supply chain from the ground up. He shared that one of the warehouse workers had been instructing him on the inventory system, and he had stayed past his shift for 3 hours to grasp it. She paused. He said it was the first time in his life he had extended his workday out of personal interest, Diane said. You granted him that, I replied, when you didn't have to, when most people wouldn't have. Walter constructed something worth defending, I added. Preston belongs to what Walter constructed. She fell silent momentarily. You're an intricate individual to despise, she admitted, and despite all the happenings, we almost chuckled. I'm 46 years old. I've resided in Phoenix for 15 years. I established a firm side by side with a man who disclosed the truth on our first encounter, and that truth served as the basis for everything that transpired later. I wish to share this final chapter of our narrative with you for a brief moment, since I believe there's something overlooked in the usual account of these events. The account where the scorned man returns victorious, where the one who underestimated him is annihilated, and where the moral is a straightforward lesson about justice striking like a hammer. This isn't our tale. Preston Holt remains present. For the first time in his life, he's constructing something tangible in Reno, collaborating with individuals unaware of his lineage while grasping the intricacies of the supply chain from knowledgeable sources. On Sunday nights, he contacts Walter. His proposals to the Nevada operations team have been considered viable enough for implementation. There's a long road ahead for him, and success isn't guaranteed. Progression isn't always linear, and sometimes the initial responsibility can be too weighty for some people to bear. Nevertheless, he persists. Striving when one hasn't needed to before is among the most challenging tasks a person can undertake. Diane Holt and I will never share a close bond. It's simply a fact. Our relationship is marked by politeness, caution, and an underlying acknowledgement that we perceive the world differently and always will. However, she shared an honest sentiment with me on that terrace. And honesty, regardless of its origin, holds value. My partnership with Walter remains intact. It hasn't faltered. This predicament, surprisingly, fortified our partnership more than it had in years due to the transparency it demanded, the discussions it necessitated. There's a peculiarity in this, but it resonates if you've witnessed relationships grow stronger because of trials. Nadine, who sipped wine on the patio as I shared my predicament and responded with approval, remains the individual I wish to share an evening meal with daily. Some matters are straightforward. That's one of them. Reflecting on what I would advise someone in a similar situation, facing a person who determined your worth without proof and acted accordingly, here's what I understand. The most detrimental action you can take when someone underestimates you is to disprove them swiftly. The crucial proof isn't the instant validation, the grand revelation, or the noisy vindication. The significant evidence lies in unwaveringly remaining who you are and steadily creating what you're building as they mold their reality from their speculations. Allow them to do so. In time, truth corrects itself, and it always will. The query is merely whether you'll remain undeterred and unchanged when that moment arrives. Preston Holt dismissed me as insignificant, pressing a folder against my chest, but 3 days later, he was pleading with me at 6:43 in the morning to impart genuine knowledge. This isn't a tale of retribution. It's a narrative about endurance, about recognizing one's accomplishments, and about the quiet resilience that reveals itself only when someone else's blunder broadcasts its existence. The Holt Coal Industrial Solutions still stand on East Camelback Road. The Nevada expansion unfolded as planned. Preston remains in Reno, consistently present, continuing to gather insights from individuals unfamiliar with Sonny. On occasions, Walter and I dine at Durant's, always occupying the same red leather booth. He continues to speak truthfully even when it discomfits him. This trait is still his most significant attribute. Occasionally, on my Arcadia back patio, early in the morning before the city stirs, I observe a roadrunner traversing the yard. Swift, peculiar, entirely indifferent to its surroundings. I've concluded that this is the ideal way to navigate life.